recognized for his amendment.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first amendment I've proposed deals with the fact that in Section 4 of this legislation, we would put Congress basically in charge of this body. And by doing so, number one, we're injecting ourselves into a process that isn't necessarily ours to rule and run. We are an institution that, as an institution, has an approval rating that hovers right around 11%, making us less popular than Fidel Castro in America and only slightly more popular than the influenza virus, which is inexplicably gaining on us. Now, why we would want to take management control of and have the ability to dissolve an institution outside of what is our domain is beyond my ability to discern, and it certainly has some real problems with it. Among other things, Mr. Chairman, it has the potential to make us judge, jury, and executioner over both the NGBs and the USOPC, calling into question our recognition as the United States Olympic organization under the International Olympic Committee. In fact, I have for the record, that I'd like to submit for the record, a letter from the International Olympic Committee to Suzanne Lyons, the president of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committees. In this letter, the IOC warns that although the IOC presumes that this power to dissolve the NGBs and the USOPC would be exercised only under extraordinary and narrow circumstances, the letter concludes that any such action would constitute undue external interference in the autonomy and internal governance of the USOPC and would be in conflict with the Olympic Charter. So allowing Section 4 to remain in this bill may well jeopardize our standing as a National Olympic Committee and call into question our ability to compete in the Olympic Games. So I call my colleagues to support.
Does the gentleman ask that letter be admitted in the record of this board? Without objection, that will be done. The gentleman may proceed.
And so that's really just the point. We need to remove Section 4. Now, I know that some may argue that there are some other countries, like China, for instance, that are already in violation of some of these IOC autonomy rules, and that China has still been allowed to compete. I would note first, we have no guarantee that that will always be the case with China or with other violators. Secondly, I hope and expect that we will always aspire to a higher position than China with regard to compliance with IOC mandates and rules and otherwise. And keeping sports separate from government is on some level something I think all of us who enjoy and support the Olympics can support. So I call on my colleagues to join me in supporting Lee Amendment number 1 to strike Section 4.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and respect to my friend from Utah, Senator Lee, I strongly oppose his amendment. The legislation that's before us has evolved after an 18-month investigation by the subcommittee of this committee. We looked at consequences for the current circumstance with the actions or lack of actions of the USOC and the governing bodies, and concluded that there needed to be a significant opportunity for Congress to respond should we determine that the Olympic Committee is not doing its work and the governing bodies are not doing what they should be doing. And incidentally, the statutory provision for the USOC is their responsibilities are to promote a safe environment in sports that is free from abuse, including emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of any amateur athlete. That protection was not provided. And this is an entity, the USOC, that was created by Congress. We are not intruding in a private business. We are suggesting that it is necessary for us to have the leverage that when USOC or its governing bodies that have jurisdiction over specific sports don't do their work, that Congress can respond in an expedited manner. This is not about financial abuse. I mean, this is about responding when sexual abuse, sexual assault, and misbehavior is occurring. We can respond quickly. And I think if the amendment is adopted, that the opportunity for this bill to proceed for final action is diminished. But I think more importantly, if the bill would pass, we've lost our leverage over an organization that needs greater oversight. It needs the attention that this Congress can provide, and I would indicate that if this amendment is adopted, striking this provision undermines the opportunity we have to better do our jobs in protecting athletes in the Olympic arena from sexual assault and sexual abuse. What has transpired in the past was woefully inadequate. The response was poor, and lives were damaged. The survivors of the assault by Dr. Nasser have said a statement that has stuck with me since I heard them say it. Why was there more than one of us? Why not, when there is a report of assault, that there is a response and there's not a second or a third or a fourth? This provision in this bill is designed to make certain that there is not, hopefully, ever a first again, but certainly not a second, third, and fourth. This amendment would significantly harm our ability to respond to protect young men and women. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moran. To speak on the amendment, I have Senators Blumenthal, Gardner, and Cantwell. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank Senator Moran for his leadership. I've been very pleased and proud to work with him on the report that we did over 18 months, which involved an extensive investigation. And most importantly, I want to thank the survivors, some of them are here today, who came forward with incredible courage and strength to tell their stories about abuse at the hands of Larry Nasser, but also a pervasive culture, not only in gymnastics, but other sports, that resulted from a lack of accountability. And this bill assures accountability through Section 4, which would be gutted by the amendment that has been offered. Lee Amendment 1 would essentially greatly undercut, if not eviscerate, this bill. And so I urge my colleagues to oppose it, because what we found in the course of this 18-month investigation was a failure on the part of people and institutions to respond to the complaints, in fact, to retaliate against those complaints, a failure of people entrusted with positions of power in positions of trust to protect young athletes from these abuses. And this bill assures greater transparency and accountability throughout the amateur sports movement. It forces a fundamental and seismic change in culture, putting athletes first and eliminating a culture that put medals and profits before people. Athlete safety has to be the priority, and that is the purpose of this bill and of Section 4, which assures that Congress is the ultimate backstop. That's the point here. There has to be a backstop, there has to be accountability, and Congress, in creating this structure, also has responsibility to everyone in the process. So the athletes who are watching today, here and around the world, should be assured that we're going to stand strong for them and make sure that this kind of abuse never happens again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gardner, followed by Senator Cantwell. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And unfortunately, I'm going to be speaking against the Lee Amendment number 1. Last night, the Olympic Committee, I think all of us received a letter that urged support for this amendment on the grounds that the International Olympic Committee, and I quote, said this. The International Olympic Committee in the letter said, quote, that it bans government interference with national Olympic committees. That's what the letter talked about. They included a letter dated October 22nd from the International Olympic Committee, making it clear that government interference is a violation of the International Olympic Committee's charters. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee submits that the IOC will, quote, and I'll quote again, will have to take away our recognition as a National Olympic Committee if this amendment does not pass. Again, that's a direct quote from the letter that all of us received. But I think we have to take a closer look at what the International Olympic Committee and this supposed requirement that government interference violates the principles set forth for National Olympic Committees. To point out an individual named Gao Zhongwen. Gao Zhongwen is currently the president of the Chinese Olympic Committee. Gao Zhongwen also serves concurrently as the general administrator of sport in China. That's a government of China, the government appointment. Gao Zhongwen works for the government of China, a member of the ruling Communist Party. There's no outrage from the International Olympic Committee about government interference in China's own Olympic Committee. There's no call for Gao Zhongwen to step down from his position that is either from the government or from the Olympic Committee to ensure that there's no interference, that this interference standard can be upheld. Those calls don't exist from the IOC about criticism in China. It's a double standard that they're trying to apply to the United States. We haven't heard anything from the IOC about the Beijing Olympics in 2022 and whether they're going to retaliate or allow retaliation against U.S. athletes or fans who may attend the Beijing or participate in the Beijing Olympics. Maybe they've said something or tweeted something or taken a stand on Hong Kong. Are they going to be affected by this? Gao Zhongwen? IOC seems to be trying to take a side in the U.S., but a double standard applied when it comes to China. So I think perhaps they should be waging a stronger fight against China. The process laid out in Section 4, as Senator Moran and Blumenthal have talked about, is sound, it's democratic, it's restrained, it's warranted by the actions that we've seen in the Olympic community over the last decade, and it's long overdue. Far from improper, national interference in the National Committee, the provision at stake here is critical to ensuring accountability for the institution that is responsible for the well-being of thousands of the world's best athletes. That's our responsibility, a responsibility that was failed and one that we can uphold. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our colleagues have done yeoman's work on this legislation, working hard to try to craft what is a very important response to the incidents that have happened. I have a question about Section 4 and the underlying motion to strike, because what I read here is that this now gives authority for Congress to pass a resolution without debate in this committee and a resolution on the Senate floor that would be binding. So that resolution would be binding and without debate could be pushed, putting our colleagues in a very precarious position. Let's pretend it was today. Today, it would be a motion to get rid of the U.S. Olympic Committee. Without debate, we'd be forced to vote on it. Without debate, it would be on the Senate floor, forcing a vote. And this is a change to the Senate process and the Senate rules. So I have questions about it. I don't know that that's the intent of the sponsors of the legislation, but that's how I read it. That's why I've asked for more information. I would hate that the United States Senate should turn into a body that we would have a resolution that would be binding on the Senate floor for a vote without understanding exactly what we are voting on. The reason why resolutions are non-binding is it allows us to express very strong opinions and raise issues. But in this case, it would be binding. And we would be voting to get rid of the U.S. Olympic Committee. And I guarantee you, there were many days I wanted to get rid of them, okay? But I think it's better to keep them and reform it and have very strong laws in place. But I want those laws to be debated, and I want them to go through a process that doesn't destroy the Senate rules or set a precedent for the next time we're going to do this. Because I guarantee you, we will be tempted. I guarantee you, I was tempted on the Khashoggi murder to say that we should act right now and be able to penalize people. But we weren't. We were just able to express our opinion. The difference between a resolution and a law is a process by which we have this debate and we move something, not bind us to not having a debate. So we need to know what we're doing, and so I asked the sponsors if they'll explain to me if this is truly their intent in this section.
Would either sponsor of the bill like to be recognized to respond? Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I point to the provision of the bill that says that, in fact, this joint resolution can be referred to the committee, our committee, before it's considered, and 3/5 of the members of the Senate can vote on the resolution if the committee is bypassed, but there is a provision relating to the process that will be followed that does not necessarily go directly to the floor, and we can continue to work on this issue with the Rules Committee, as Senator Moran and I have discussed doing. I ask my colleagues to oppose an amendment that would simply completely cut from this bill a provision that is necessary for accountability.
Does anyone wish to speak before Senator Lee is recognized to close? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I got an answer to my question. This section 4 on page 10 says a motion to proceed is in order even though the previous motion, which is to refer it to committee, has been disagreed with. The motion to proceed is not debatable. The motion is not subject to motion to postpone. So literally, our colleagues could be forcing, at a moment where a lot of heightened intensity is there, and trust me, there's a lot of moments when Congress has a lot of heightened intensity, we would be setting a precedent here for resolutions on the Senate floor to be binding without a due process in a committee or hearing, and to have us then continue this process. So I wish we would resolve this, and I really do respect our colleagues, Senator Blumenthal and Moran, for trying to get resolution to this issue before this morning, but clearly I think this section as it stands is problematic. I don't know what the best way forward, Mr. Chairman, is to fix that, but I clearly think it's a problematic section that would lead Congress down a road that we don't really want to go.
Senator Cruz to speak on the amendment.
Two things. I think the concerns Senator Cantwell is raising are serious concerns, and I share those concerns. But secondly, I wanted to give the bill sponsors a chance to more directly address the letter from the International Olympic Committee that, as I understand it, and I'm reading it right now, it at least threatens the possibility that the U.S. Olympic Committee could be removed from recognition, which obviously I understand everyone here wants to, number one, support our athletes, and number two, act to prevent sexual assault, but no one wants to jeopardize the status of American athletes to be able to participate in these competitions. How do the sponsors respond to that concern raised by the International Olympic Committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schatz.
Just a question of I guess, statutory interpretation. It says, notwithstanding the standing rules of the Senate, after the Committee on Commerce reports the joint resolution, it shall be in order for any member of the Senate to move to proceed. Now, I thought that although we never do it, it is in fact in order for any member to move to proceed to any measure on the Senate floor. So although it's sort of strangely drafted, in my opinion, I'm not sure this confers on the members of the Senate as it relates to the floor any authorities that we don't already possess. It's always in order for anyone to move to proceed. We just don't do it because that would probably blow up the whole place. But I'd like to get a little more clarity on what this in fact does that's outside of the normal process.
Senator Schatz, it appears on lines 24, 25, and 26 that the motion then must be agreed to by the Senate. Senator Blunt, the chairman of the Rules Committee, is recognized.
I think Senator Schatz is correct that any member can move to proceed, but there is in Rule 19, there's a hierarchy of recognition that starts with the majority leader, which is how we keep things on the floor in some semblance of order. This would do more of what I think is done with the Congressional Review Act, where this takes precedence over all other issues. So it would be adding to a unique list of things that are precedential, that take precedence on the Senate floor. So it does change the rules. Whether we'd use it often or it would be a particular impediment, I don't know. But it does establish a new order of recognition on this particular issue.
Mr. Chairman.
The ranking member is recognized.
I am concerned about the Rules Committee and the process of the Rules Committee. I'm more concerned that we would create a process where we would just be forced into committee to vote today. For example, you could have this resolution, disband the USOC committee today because of their violations. And we would be forced to vote on that. And if it passed, we would be forced to vote on it as a resolution. And as a resolution, unlike resolutions today, it would have the binding force of canceling out the committee. And so I'm just saying, I guarantee you, there are moments when I would have liked to have done that. Trust me, that's how upset. But at the same time, I want us to have a deliberate process here. And if that's what we're going to be doing, changing resolutions to be binding, I got a lot of them I'd like to submit, okay? But I don't think that's a good legislative process. And so that's the distinction that I most object to, if in fact that is my read of it and it is correct, that this is what we would be doing. We would be making it a binding resolution without, if we want to get rid of the U.S. Olympic Committee, let's have a vote, let's have a discussion, let's decide to do that. But I think our colleagues are trying to create a hammer here that might lead to an unnecessary precedent that I think is a dangerous slope for us to be going down as a group of lawmakers on this process. Now, if we want to pass a resolution saying that is non-binding, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. That is the way Congress now shows their frustration. We have a lot of resolutions where we express that. But this is different. This is saying it would be binding to get rid of the U.S. Olympic Committee on the approval of that resolution. That's the difference.
Let me make this suggestion to members. What if we hear Senator Moran respond to the concerns that have been raised, and then we allow Senator Lee to close on his amendment? Will that be satisfactory? If so, that will be the procedure. Senator Moran to be followed by Senator Lee, and then we'll vote.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. The only amendment I would have, modification I would have to your suggestion is if the committee's counsel wants to comment on the process, I'd welcome their legal skills in doing so. But what I would say to the senator from Texas and the ranking member in their points, first of all, the process by which we have undertaken an expedited procedure is based upon other precedents already in existence. The opportunity for us to accelerate the process only comes when 3/5, 60 senators agree that we should. That's a difficult challenge, as we all know in this place. It's not an easy threshold, but it's not foreign to us in the United States Senate. We do this on CRAs. We do this on trade agreements. So we went back to the Council and said, help us find a way to get this issue in front of the Senate, that it can be resolved in a quicker way than the normal process of the United States Senate. And of course, they then look at how we've done this in the past. What are the opportunities we've had to expedite Senate resolution? I would say that the difficulty that we would face in the process of this occurring is still tremendous. This is not going to happen on a whim. And again, the committee is included, again, only if 60 senators say that we're going to expedite, do we expedite. And then in regard to the senator from Texas, I think the senator from Colorado, Senator Gardner, addressed the issue of the International Olympic Committee's comments. I do think that it's not surprising, to me at least, that the U.S. Olympic Committee is not favorably inclined to the provision that's in our bill and as their right to do, trying to point out things that we should find objection to so that this threshold, this leverage disappears. I'm not surprised the U.S. Olympic Committee doesn't want Congress to have that leverage. It's the reason that we need the leverage is to get their attention. And if they don't provide that attention, the ability then to change that board of directors of the U.S. Olympic Committee. So I think this is an effort by the U.S. Olympic Committee to try to advocate for a position that is different than what we concluded after significant debate and discussion among our subcommittee members. This was the way to proceed.
Senator Lee to close, and then we'll vote.
There's no question that the abuse that took place under the umbrella of the Olympic Committee was tragic, and that things need to be done about that. I commend the authors of this bill for doing that. I do want to be clear that Section 4, which Lee Amendment number 1 seeks to strike, is not limited in any way, shape, or form to abuse. Not sexual abuse, not physical abuse, not any kind of abuse. It is a veto, effectively. Not just a veto of an individual decision, it's a veto of the USOPC itself and of the NGBs. They can just vitiate them, dissolve them. Now, that's a very blunt instrument. It's a big deal, and for that reason, it's not surprising to me that the International Olympic Committee has raised concerns about it. It is not a defense to this, as I see it, to say, well, China has got somebody on the board who holds multiple positions in China, who also holds government positions. I don't aspire to be like China in any way. We know that they've got a weird system of government over there. You meet people over there who have the equivalent of Chief Justice, President, House Speaker, and Governor all in the same title. Apparently separation of powers isn't a thing over there. Regardless, they're playing fast and loose with the rules. We can't guarantee that they're not going to have action taken against them. I don't know why we would want to give ourselves an even bigger and even more significant, brighter, larger target and put it on our back with the International Olympic Committee, but that is what we would be doing here. So I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment and strike Section 4.
The question recurs on the amendment by Senator Lee. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes do have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Senator Lee.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up Lee Amendment number 7 as modified. I'll be very brief on this. One purpose of this bill is to more clearly empower the USOPC and the NGBs and the Center for Safe Sport to tackle issues of trauma and abuse with regard to the athletes. It's an important issue. No athlete should ever have to confront these issues. But as the threats to the athletes has increased, so too has the response from Congress, quite fortunately. It's important to remember that some, but not all of the Center's responsibilities involve responding to actions that can be deemed criminal in nature. We don't want this bill to get mired in a dispute between, say, an athlete and a coach regarding the number of laps that the athlete was required to run, either as punishment for being late to practice or otherwise. And so Lee Amendment number 7 is modified, would limit action taken under this provision to only those that are criminal in nature. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Who wishes to speak on the Lee Amendment? Does anyone wish to speak? There being no one.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I sympathize with the intent of this amendment. Everybody on this committee, in fact, everybody in this body is in favor of due process. Let's keep in mind that the U.S. Olympic Committee is a private organization. Due process ordinarily applies to government entities. Here, we would be requiring due process in a private organization, and to the extent it performs a governmental institution, it's already bound by the Constitution. So my fear is, and my reason for opposing this amendment is, that it would give the potential targets of sanctions, the abusers, an additional procedural argument that would delay justice. And justice has been delayed all too often for the victims and survivors of this kind of abuse. And I would yield to Senator Moran with the...
Senator Blumenthal, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I, too, oppose the amendment. I saw the amendment last night. At this stage in the process, I think it's difficult to know what the consequences are of a due process requirement. Historically, traditionally, legally, due process is not a private entity occurrence. Safe Sport is a private organization. It serves private sports organizations. Its duty is to determine the character and fitness of the participants. Safe Sport has its rules in place. We're uncertain as to whether due process would confirm or alter their rules. I think this is a topic that could use additional attention, but for us to make a determination at this point in the process, I think it is not the time, and there's not enough knowledge to know exactly what the consequences would be. I urge the opposition to the amendment, but certainly volunteer to work with the Senator Lee in regard to making certain that the process is appropriate.
Senator Lee, do you wish to close on your amendment number 7?
I would add that the more we mire Congress in the duties of managing these entities, the more we make it like a government. Now, there's not one example of abuse I can think of that we would be concerned about that wouldn't in some way fit within the category of potentially criminal conduct. That shouldn't worry us. We should welcome that restriction. I urge a yes on this amendment.
The vote now recurs on Lee Amendment number 7. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. The vote now recurs on the underlying bill. Are members ready to vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, aye. All opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and the motion is agreed to, and the bill is passed.
Mr. Chairman.
Do members wish Senator Lee?
I'd like to be recorded as a no on this bill that we just passed, 2330, and also on 2782, 481, 1640, 1982, 2346, 2429, 2453, and 2805.
Did the clerk get all of those?
If not, I've got it in writing.
That will be done. Thank you, Senator Lee, and thank you to members for their courtesy. Senator Cantwell,